Fromily, it's Julie B. Deep Dives, and today I'm diving into the journey of Jim Matthews, the patriarch of the Matthews family who was the most shocking casualty of From Season 3. Since From first began, we've all wondered about the significance of the very first scene we ever saw of the Matthews, which had to be important considering it's the first time we ever saw our central family on the show. It depicted Julie playing with Ethan's finger puppets, one of which was named Norman, and I think we might finally have an answer as to who Norman represents, thanks to the plot twist of future Julie trying to save Jim. Jim lost his life in the stunning culmination of the season finale as a demonic-looking man in a yellow suit showed up and slashed his throat open. But can future Julie bring him back? And also, for those who think the writers haven't known what they're doing or where they were going with the story, I'm going to do my best to disprove that notion in my upcoming videos, starting with this one on Jim, by pointing out how the writing foreshadowed his eventual death even from the very first episode of From Season 1. So without further ado, let's get into it. Now, why do I think Jim represents the finger puppet Norman? It starts with Julie's storyline in Season 3, so let's break that down first. In Episode 8, titled Thresholds, Julie re-entered the dungeon dream state through some kind of combination of astral projection and time travel. She threw the rope to Boyd at Martin's direction. It appears to be a closed-loop bootstrap paradox in which Julie was always meant to throw the rope to Boyd. It's a frustrating thing to wrap your head around, but essentially it happened because it always had to happen that way. Boyd later went on to save Julie from the dungeon dream state in the Season 2 finale. After being saved from that dream state, in Season 3 Julie goes back there and travels backward in time to throw Boyd the rope. If she hadn't done that, Boyd wouldn't have been there to save her from the dream state in Season 2, and if he hadn't saved her, she wouldn't have been able to travel back in time in Season 3 and save him. It's an endless loop, a bootstrap paradox with no clear start or end point. Nothing was altered by Julie's time travel, nothing other than that. It just completed an action that was always supposed to happen that way. But we saw Jim die at the end of Season 3, and future Julie was not able to save him, so I don't think that can be changed, unless they use a different model of time travel than what they already showed us. If she can change it, it would be more like the grandfather paradox, where you can go back in time and change something that actually affects the present. Normally, the grandfather paradox wipes a present person out of existence, but in this case, she'd be bringing a person back into existence who wasn't there anymore. We know for a fact that Jim shouldn't be there with future Julie anymore, otherwise she wouldn't have shown up to try to save him now. So if she does save him, she will be changing the fabric of her present reality, magically bringing him back into it. Now compare this to the Boyd situation. When Julie went back in time and threw him the rope, he was already there in existence in her present time. She didn't bring him back from the dead. She completed an action in the past that allowed her present reality to stay the same, with Boyd alive, and with herself having been freed from the dungeon along with Randall and Marielle. So Julie was only maintaining the status quo by going back in time and throwing him the rope. There was no version of reality in which Boyd didn't make it out of the well, or she wouldn't even be alive to help him get out of the well through time travel later. Actually, if Boyd had never made it out of the well and gotten the worms, then the cicada entity would have never been brought to town or unleashed when they cut open Smiley. And ergo, Julie wouldn't have been in the cicada coma to begin with. So the fabric of her present reality would be totally different if she hadn't gone and thrown him the rope. So you can see the difference here? Saving Jim would constitute a completely different model of time travel, and if future Julie does that, she will change her present reality from where she's come from, in whatever time that she's from in the future, which could have other repercussions that get a lot messier. I think Ethan is right when he tells her that you can't change a story that's already been told. After she said she thought she could bring Ten Chen back, or even Thomas. He told her it doesn't work that way. Ethan telling Julie in the finale of season 3 that she can't bring people back who've died is an ironic reversal from their dialogue in season 1, episode 1 about Norman. Julie was teasing Ethan with his finger puppets, saying that Norman the puppet died because, quote, the monster's claws went too deep, unquote. Ethan responded, but the secret fairies are coming from the Lake of Tears, right? They're going to make him better. And Julie responds, sorry, buddy, Norman's dead, and when you're dead, you're gone. Ethan gets upset, saying, bring him back, you have to bring him back. And Julie responds, sometimes life is hard, kid. This is some heavy foreshadowing. I think that Jim represents Norman here. When Julie said the monster's claws went too deep, we actually saw a shot of Jim driving the RV, and he's later killed by the man in yellow's claws in his neck. Also, Ethan says, bring him back, Julie, which foreshadows that future Julie will eventually time travel and try to bring Jim back to prevent his death. Interestingly, Julie tells Ethan that when you're dead, you're gone, so it's not possible to bring Norman back. But later, we see a reversal of roles. In the season 3 finale, Ethan tells Julie that she can't bring back Tan Shan or Thomas through time travel, or story walking as he calls it. He says you can't change a story once it's been told. So now he's the one saying that you can't bring people back from the dead, and Julie is the one who's going to try, ironically. He's lost his innocence after the horror he's been living through, but Ethan's always been very clear-headed and insightful about what stories and quests can constitute and what's possible within them. So I believe him. Now, is Julie symbolizing one of the secret fairies coming from the Lake of Tears to try to save Jim? Does that mean that there are others who will help her? Maybe the other two from the cicada coma, Marielle and Randall? Perhaps. It's still unclear where the Lake of Tears is in Fromville, but it's probably represented by a body of water we haven't seen yet, not the Brundles, which is just a small watering hole from the looks of it. In season 1, episode 2, Julie tells Ethan that Norman is all right, and the secret fairies have made it back from the Lake of Tears, and Norman's going to be okay. But Ethan is not reassured. It's as if he doesn't believe it, and I trust his instincts. He has been giving us insight into stories and quests from the beginning, and I've always thought his dialogue was important and giving us insight. Besides, for the reason I said before regarding models of time travel, I don't think Julie will successfully bring Jim back. And just look at Ethan's face here. He clearly doesn't believe her that Norman is going to be okay, or that it's possible at this point. There's one caveat to this, though. Tabitha tells Ethan in season 1, episode 1 that there is no such thing as monsters, so that means that Norman is alive. So it's possible that this could be foreshadowing something yet to come. Perhaps by the end of the series, the monsters will be obliterated along with Fromville, so technically there will be no such thing as monsters at that point. But will that somehow reset Jim's demise and bring him back? I'm not sure how or why, how this could possibly work, and hopefully they wouldn't resurrect every character who passed away, because that would cheapen the emotional depth of those moments. We'll have to wait and see on that. Another theory is that Norman is Thomas, and somehow he's still alive and on a quest. As Ethan once said, he thinks that this is true in season 1. I'm not sure how that would work, though. He died in the real world before the Matthews arrived. Unless Thomas survived an alternate timeline or universe, but that would be adding yet another layer of complexity to an already very complex show. So I don't think Norman is Thomas. Incidentally, Norman is the yellow finger puppet, and yellow is a color in the show that's symbolic of hope, in my opinion. The man in yellow is the one who kills Jim, but his suit is filthy, and I think it represents the sullying of hope, the hope of everyone being tarnished. The other finger puppet is red, and red seems to represent evil in the show, which is odd since the red finger puppet is supposed to be Norman's friend. So it's unclear what character could represent Norman's friend. And the dialogue that Norman says doesn't line up to Jim's situation well. He says, "Tell my friends I love them. Tell my parents I said goodbye." But these details might not matter. That other puppet wasn't even given a name and might not correspond to a character at all. This little make-believe with the puppets was probably just put there as foreshadowing, and not all of it has to match up perfectly. Now here, in Tabitha's Season 1, Episode 9 Premonition Dream, she actually walks by the finger puppets laying on the lighthouse steps. Definitely a reminder to us that the Norman scene was significant. Other items that she passed turned out to be important too, like a toy ambulance that foreshadowed her return to Frumville on an ambulance. When Tabitha ascends to the top of the staircase, in a jarring moment, she sees Jim hanging upside down, reaching for her. When he opens his mouth and screams, the RV sound comes out of his mouth. This is heavily foreshadowing his demise in the Season 3 finale, which happens to be near the RV. That's not a coincidence. And I knew that the scene of him hanging upside down in the dream would definitely be paid off eventually, and I figured it would most likely be by the end of Season 3. The show couldn't wait any longer to finally bring that moment to fruition. I always knew it wouldn't be Jim going to the lighthouse and literally getting caught hanging upside down. It's symbolism, the image of him getting caught in the middle of her journey to the lighthouse, hanging upside down and reaching helplessly for her. And sure enough, in the Season 3 finale, he dies because he is figuratively reaching for her, supporting her as she accompanies Jade to the bottle tree so Jade can play the song he had decoded. Jim was the one who figured out that the numbers from the bottle tree translate to music notes, so ironically, he sealed his own fate in doing so. He was suspicious of how easily the song came into Jade's head once he started to decode the numbers, but against his better judgment, he grew as a character and supported Tabitha in her mission to go with Jade and listen to the song in the woods. This triggered Jade and Tabitha's epiphany, the knowledge of their true reincarnated origins. When the man in yellow appeared to Jim, he said that knowledge comes at a cost before killing him, which was a truly unfair fate for Jim, as there's nothing he could have done to prevent any of this from happening, other than keep his idea about the music notes to himself, I suppose. He was helpless to stop Tabitha from her mission from the moment they arrived in town. That's when the foreshadowing of his death began, all the way back in the first episode. It wasn't just the Norman dialogue. There was more, which really shows that this was planned from the start, in my opinion. When they got into the accident, Jim was nearly impaled to death by a tree that came through the RV window. Symbolically, it seems to represent Tabitha's twisted, messed up family tree of reincarnated souls from her past lives, which was eventually going to lead to Jim's demise. As the tree pinned him in his seat, Jim was trapped and kept reaching for Tabitha, but he couldn't get to her as she lay there unconscious. He continued to try to reach for her in several scenes, unsuccessfully, and the imagery of him helplessly reaching for her unconscious body while pinned by that tree could not be more symbolic. She was always going to be beyond his reach, at a distance from him, figuratively, because of her history. And there's nothing he could have done to help her or connect with her on a deeper level in the end. It makes sense now why it seemed like he was the only one trying to hold on to their marriage, reminiscing over their past in the first episode of the series while she shut him down immediately. And he actually reflected on that scene right before his demise, still holding on to that marriage that was clearly not something Tabitha was interested in anymore. Jade is the one she was destined to work with, because their reincarnated souls are intrinsically connected. That's why she instinctively pulled away from Jim in season 2 and began confiding in Jade and working with him to try to seek answers. That was no coincidence, in my opinion. But getting back to this scene, Tabitha appeared to be dead, a hint that she has died over and over again and come back as reincarnations of her original self. She remained unconscious in the RV until Boyd and Kenny brought her out of there. As she officially arrived back where she came from, she revived and awakened with a headache. She had died and essentially come back to life many times over to come back to this place. So this situation is a metaphor for the fact that she has unconsciously been Miranda and all of the other past selves who came before her all along, as she died and kept returning here over and over again. And again, it was her twisted family tree that got Jim trapped in Frumville, symbolized by this tree that pinned him in his seat, helpless and unable to reach her. As Jade and Tabitha discussed, Tabitha was always going to wind up here, no matter what she did. She had no free will in this. She dreamed about the place as a child, and she was a chosen one like Miranda. So Frumville pulled her in, and Jim was just unlucky enough to be along for the ride. He was always going to end up dying as a result of this. It's clear to me that it was planned from the start by the writers, based on the heavy foreshadowing beginning in the very first episode of the series. And if Henry had been in the car with Miranda when she showed up in town, it's likely that Henry wouldn't have survived either. But that's not all the foreshadowing that occurred. There's more in episode 1. My live co-host Scarlet Minded noticed this clever detail. As Jim was getting out of the RV and walking toward the funeral for Megan and Lauren, Jim was on screen by himself while Father Khatri was saying the line, "Ashes to ashes, dust to dust." See, it's detail like this that makes me love this show so much. The level of planning that went into it, and the genius, clever use of foreshadowing and symbolism as I've discussed in this video. More symbolism came after the voice on the radio told Jim, "Your wife shouldn't be digging that hole," in the season 1 finale. He ran home, but by the time he got there, it was too late to stop her. She had already fallen through the hole into the creature's cave, and the more Jim tried to dig her out, the more debris kept falling on him, until the entire house was on him, as he fought a losing battle. He was always meant to fight a losing battle with Tabitha, as her reincarnated self was always beyond his reach, both literally and figuratively. Once again, much like in the first episode when he was helplessly pinned in his seat by a tree, reaching out to her in vain, Jim was left helpless here and unable to reach his wife, trapped under the house, as she was already off on her journey that would lead her out of Frumville and on the path to discovering her true origins. Falling through that hole and seeing the first Ankui child in the cave was what kick-started Tabitha's journey to remembering her past lives. It's no wonder, then, that once she started seeing the children, she instinctively pulled away from Jim and shared her experience with Jade instead, as we would later find out that one of the Ankui kids was their daughter. On an unconscious level, she always knew it. So she chose to open up to Jade in both season 2 and season 3 about her visions of the children, and was never able to effectively communicate with Jim on this. The truth is, Jim never stood a chance. The man in yellow said, "This didn't have to happen, you know. I tried to warn you. Your wife shouldn't have dug that hole, Jim." But what could Jim have done? Like I said, that warning came too late, and Jim couldn't have stopped her from digging in time. He actually underwent significant character growth, though, in supporting Tabitha's mission, even against his better judgment in season 3, going with her and Jade to play the song, and it cost him his life. Jim paid the ultimate price for Tabitha's newfound knowledge of her origins, and I think it was the point. It was the point to cause her so much trauma that it will distract her from her mission to save the children and break the cycle. And once again, I don't think that future Julie can reverse Jim's fate. It was always going to end this way. Jim, aka Norman, is dead. And like Julie said, when you're dead, you're gone, as she said in the first episode. So while Jim was a polarizing character with many flaws, it's a shame to see him go out through no fault of his own. Julie will surely try again to save him, but the best she can probably do is gain information through her story walking, which could help Tabitha and Jade gain insight into past cycles at least. Now, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the final instance of foreshadowing, which made me correctly predict that Jim would die in the finale. His touching family scenes in Season 3, Episode 9, showing major character growth with each family member, which often indicates that a character is on the chopping block in series, like this one. Even when Julie tells him she was in the woods with Randall, he doesn't fly off the handle at her with his usual anger issues. He also exhibits growth by not even flipping out on Randall. Instead, he actually asks for Randall's insight into what could be going on with Julie, since he was in the same cicada coma. Randall says Jim should just teach Julie how to drive because there's nothing else he can do about their predicament, and he says the chilling line, "None of us are getting out of here alive." Jim says he doesn't accept that, and this is yet another moment that foreshadows his impending demise. And Randall turns out to be right that there's nothing Jim can do, so he should just make the most of his time that he has left. And once again, Jim shows more growth with Tabitha as well. He stops invalidating her ideas and feelings, pledging to her his full support with her quest to figure out what her mission to save the children means. With the diner newly reopened, the Matthews family has a family meal together for the first time in a while, as Jim is trying to do better as a husband and father. Later, Julie tells Tabitha that when she went back into the dungeon dream state, she was afraid that she wouldn't find her way out and that she'd be alone. Tabitha tells her that she'll never, never be alone here. More foreshadowing. This show is heavy on the foreshadowing. Julie will indeed not be alone, even though Jim was going to die, as she would still have her mother and brother. And the final piece of the foreshadowing, the final nail in Jim's proverbial coffin, is glaringly obvious. Jim and Ethan visit the RV, and Jim has a heartfelt talk with Ethan, who blames himself for what happened to Julie in the dungeon ruins. Jim opens up about his feelings of guilt about the accident when they first arrived in town, how he never would have forgiven himself if he lost Ethan as he lost Thomas. He carries the constant burden of guilt for Thomas tragically falling off his changing table and dying. And as for the car accident, Ethan tells him it wasn't his fault because he was scared and doing the best he could. Jim tells Ethan that the same thing applies to him and Julie. He says, "Things happen here, things we can't control. This place wants us to blame ourselves. It wants us to be scared. You have to remember that we're all doing our best, even when bad things happen. Especially when bad things happen. It's how we face those things. That's what matters. Not the decisions we make or whose fault it was, but how we take care of each other and how we always do our best no matter what." And what a speech that was. Dripping with foreshadowing that Jim would die in the season finale. I mean, after all, it's happening in the RV, where he's reflecting on their arrival in the first episode and bringing his story arc full circle. And after making many mistakes with his family, he has multiple touching family moments in that episode and makes amends with every family member, reminiscing and imparting wisdom to Ethan here. It sounds like the perfect parting piece of loving wisdom for Ethan to carry with him as he faces all the challenges that this place will bring. That, again, was the final nail in Jim's coffin and had me convinced that he would not make it out of season 3. But could his death be reversed through Julie's time travel? Now, I personally don't think so. With the amount of foreshadowing and planning that happened since the very first episode of season 1 until the end, it seems like Jim was always meant to die here, and if that gets changed, it would cheapen the emotional impact of it, the way I see it. Again, It would also clash with the closed-loop bootstrap paradox of time travel that I believe we saw with Julie throwing the rope to Boyd. Now, I want to know what you guys think. Could Norman represent Jim in this story or someone else? Who would represent the secret fairies trying to save Norman? And could they be successful? Why did the man in yellow kill Jim? And is it possible to change the story and bring Jim back? Finally, what do you think will happen as a result of Julie's story walking? Let me know what you think down in the comments. And if you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and subscribe. And until next time, keep on deep diving and let's see what we can uncover together.